What's up, guys? Hope you're doing well so far. Let's cut straight to the chase. You are watching the first video on the Fruitier Shade channel, the second channel to the Fruity Shade channel. And today I have the first episode in a series in which I go through and rate every episode of my favorite television series, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, both for its objective quality, or at least as close as I can get to that, within human error, of course, and its entertainment value, its enjoyability, on a scale from 1 to 10. And today we have a doozy. We have Season 1, Episode 1, Emissary. So this is the pilot, obviously. Lots of setup, lots of exposition. This is also a double-length episode. So this is going to be a hard review to do. It's going to be hard to put a number on this episode. It's also going to be a pretty long review as well, because there's just a lot to talk about. Lots of setup, lots of content just in general. So join me as we talk about Emissary today. I'm going to go ahead and roll the intro, pull up my notes, and then, yeah, let's engage. Alright, so, Emissary, Season 1, Episode 1 of Deep Space Nine. This is a pretty decent episode for Season 1. So we'd all know Season 1 of DS9, and for most Trek series, not usually very good, just to be honest. This is an episode that, relative to its season, is pretty alright, maybe even the best Star Trek pilot to this date. At least, I mean, like, between this one, TNG, and TOS. It's pretty good for a pilot, and obviously I'll unpack why I believe these things to be true, but overall it's not outstanding. It has some problems that I think are pretty severe. So it's kind of hard to discuss this episode because it's a pilot and does a lot of setup and stuff. So I'll just start off with the general plot synopsis. So this episode starts off with the Battle of Wolf 359 that we see in Best of Both Worlds, I believe, from The Next Generation, with our new main character, our new lead, captain or commander at the time. Well, commander in the first few seasons, captain in the latter few seasons. I don't think he's a commander yet at the time of the Wolf 359 incident. So we have Benjamin Sisko, a Starfleet officer who was on one of the ships that was destroyed by the Borg in the battle, led by Picard as Locutus of Borg, right? And on the ship, we find that his wife is dead. The ship is getting destroyed. He saves his son, but finds his wife's body, and his fellow officers drag him off as he kicks and screams because he doesn't want to leave her body behind. And they go to an escape pod, and the ship blows up, and she's gone. And that's the opening of this new Star Trek series. A very dark, very emotional, very scary opening that we don't really see in TNG or TOS. In TNG, I think the first episode starts off with a lot of like shots of the Enterprise and like flying around and stuff, very like dramatic, very aesthetic. This one is just right out the gate, boom, just dark, scary, no mercy, right? And then we cut to the next scene after the opening, which I love the DS9 opening. I know it gets made fun of because they just kind of fly around the pylons and stuff, but it visually does more than the rest of the openings have so far. And also, it's just the music is peak. I love the DS9 music. I think it's great, very strong. It has like a lot of like fortitude behind it, but also lonely, right? And isolated, perhaps, is a good word. It's just great. I love the opening. So after the opening, we see Sisko, now a commander, and his son Jake, who's a bit older now, probably like 12-ish, and they're in a holodeck on a ship that pulls up to this new station, a previously Cardassian station, when Cardassia was occupying Bajor. This new, well, not new as in TNG, but this is like its first real focus in Star Trek, this planet of Bajor. So the Bajorans have driven out the Cardassians, or rather the Cardassians have stripped the planet of all of its resources, so that they've left. And they've left the station, and now the Federation has come onto the station to help the Bajorans rebuild and stuff. And so this is a Cardassian station that's in ruins because the Cardassians trashed it on their way out, with Bajoran people on it that don't want another government to come and take over their station, so they're pretty opposed to the Federation being there. And then we obviously have Commander Sisko, who is the new commander of this from Starfleet, creates a pretty tough dynamic for him to deal with. So we get to the station. He doesn't want to be here. His son doesn't want to be here. No one wants to be here, honestly. And while he's there, we get a scene where he visits Captain Picard on the Enterprise. And this is a very interesting scene to me for a lot of reasons that I'll touch on here in a minute. But we see our new lead, Commander Sisko, meet with the fan-beloved character, Captain Picard from The Next Generation. And that's just a genuinely good scene. Like, Sisko obviously is not a big fan of Picard. Actually, he kind of hates him because he blames him for his wife's death. Understandably so. Not necessarily fair, but also understandable. And Picard kind of just doesn't know how to react to that. So he kind of just tells him, do your job. Sisko's like, yeah, I'll do it. Like, even if the job is bad, like, or if it's tough, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, right? And then we see Sisko even says that he wants to resign. Like, he's asking for a change of position. And Picard's like, yeah, I can have that arranged, but in the meantime, do your job. So he's like, sure. So he goes on the station. We get some character introductions. We see the Bajoran Major, Kira Nerys, is on the station already. She's very belligerent, very against Starfleet, the Federation, being on the station, because she was one of the underground resistance fighters in the Bajoran Cardassian conflict. And she is just very independent, very rebellious, does not want the Federation to be on her station. We also see Constable Odo, the changeling who was the security officer on the station prior to the Federation being there. So there's a few characters. It's Odo, Kira, and Quark, the bartender, a Ferengi bartender. He's one of the best characters in the show, in my opinion. These are characters that were already there on the station prior to the Federation arriving. And then Sisko comes, and we don't see a whole lot of other Starfleet officers before, like, halfway through the episode. So Sisko is kind of on his own here with these not so friendly faces, to be honest. And then we also find out that there's this religion that the Bajorans follow that involves these creatures called the Prophets. They're trying to collect these orbs, these MacGuffins, if you want to call them that, the tears of the Prophets. And when one of the religious figures, called the Kai, I think it's Kai Opaka here, wants to talk to Sisko, he's kind of hesitant to do so. He doesn't really want to talk to her. And so he goes down anyway, though, to Bajor and talks to the Kai. And she's like, yeah, just so you know, you are the emissary. You are the emissary for the Prophets between, like, us and the Prophets. He's like, what does that mean? I don't want to do this. And he never really fully accepts the role of emissary in the episode yet. Obviously, this is a setup for a lot later in the show. But he also gets to see one of these orbs. And when he touches it, it opens up, and he gets this flashback to when he met his wife, Jennifer, on the beach. And it's a pretty awkward scene. I'll mention that later as well. I'm just trying to lay the foundation here, and then I'll talk about what I actually think about what happens later. But we're almost done, so don't worry. So he has that kind of that flashback, and then he wakes up, and he's pretty distraught about the whole thing. Later on, he goes, or rather, I should say, the characters find there's a wormhole that's right next to the station and the planet, and they go through the wormhole on accident, I believe, and they encounter these creatures called the Prophets, which are the prophets from the Bajoran religion. And so, Sisko has this conversation with them. It's kind of like this first contact, where they don't really know who he is, and they don't trust him. They think that he's dangerous because he's not the same kind of creature. He is a humanoid. He is a solid physical creature that the Bajoran prophets don't understand, because they're these kind of like godlike, misty cloud creatures that kind of just exist. And they discuss time. He insists that time is like baseball, and how you throw a pitch, and a guy swings at it, and then you throw the next pitch, and the guy swings, and you can never go back to the previous pitch or the previous swing. You can only go forward to the next pitch or the next swing, right? So he uses that as a metaphor, setting up kind of his interest in baseball, which is pretty important later on in the show. And then the prophets are like, actually, no, time is not linear, because they rip him out of the baseball scene, and they throw him into the scene where his wife died. And he immediately snaps, and he's like, he's distraught, because, I mean, this is where he watched his wife die. So the prophets are like, yeah, if time is linear and you only exist in the present, then why are you still so affected by this? They're like, you exist here. You don't exist in the present, yet you're still living in this moment. And Sisko has a full meltdown. He's like, yeah, I exist here. Time is not linear. And the prophets kind of they accept that, and they let him go. And they open up the wormhole for passage to and from for whoever wants to go. So I should also mention that the wormhole goes from the Alpha Quadrant to the Gamma Quadrant, so this brand new area of space. So the prophets say, yeah, I trust your type. If you want to go through the portal, go ahead. And so that's the arrangement. After that, not a whole lot else happens besides the fact that Sisko kind of comes to terms with his wife's death and meets Picard again, says that he wants to stay on the station. He doesn't want to get changed to a different post. And they shake hands, kind of passing on the torch. That's about where it ends. So now that I've laid out that kind of groundwork for what the episode is and like what happens in it, let's talk about what I think about some of the stuff that occurs. Some positives and negatives. There's a number of both. My first thing I want to mention is Avery Brooks as Captain Sisko. His performance, his acting performance. It's not very good, to be honest. I think Avery Brooks is a very talented singer and actor. He does very good later on, playing this super, like, emotionally invested, but also laying the foot down, badass Captain Sisko, who doesn't take no for an answer. He does things his own way, not by the books. Very different from Picard and Kirk, and which I appreciate. But here, while he seems to have that character kind of in mind, he doesn't really pull it off very well, which is tough because Sisko is the way that we're supposed to, the lens through which we're supposed to view this station. He is the way that the audiences are supposed to see the world around them through Sisko's eyes, which makes the Picard scene very interesting because they villainize Picard in Sisko's eyes. This beloved character, fan favorite character, this pillar of morals and good decisions and leadership from the next generation, is generally frowned upon by Sisko when the audience is supposed to kind of see things through Sisko. It's a very bold move for transitioning from a new series to use a beloved series to kind of as contrast for the new series, to set it up as a darker series, as a more serious kind of series, right? But in general, Avery Brooks, yeah, not spectacular. I think, and it stays this way for a while. I'm going to go ahead and be honest. He isn't great until a couple seasons in. He has some good moments, but here, at least the first half, kind of tough. The scene with the flashback to his wife, super awkward. Just he seems very emotionally stifled. I think he doesn't hit a proper emotional note until the breakdown in the wormhole in the second half of the episode, where he's like, "I exist here," and he accepts it, and he kind of breaks down. That's a moment that I wish we had sooner, because we don't see him really grapple with his wife's death until that moment. I wish we had seen him still struggling, so that when we get to the Picard part, where he's mad at Picard, we can actually see him have like a quote reasonable crash out, because he doesn't seem sad or angry enough prior to the Picard moment to actually make his feelings towards Picard feel earned or justified. It kind of just happens, and then we flash forward, and he's kind of chill about it, right? I wish we had seen him have like a full-on meltdown over his wife prior to Picard, so that moment would have more impact. But in general, the Picard scene is great. I think it's very bold, very, like, I don't know, it's just a great choice that I wasn't expecting, and I didn't really notice in the first time that I watched it. I was like 14 back then, but it's very just well done, using TNG as a contrast to this new, darker series, and also having them shake hands in the end. It shows that, yeah, they're like, Picard's not the bad guy. He's just a guy doing his job. Sisko was also just a guy doing his job. They shake hands, they pass the torch. Great scene all the way around. Patrick Stewart might be the best performance in this episode so far. He also has a scene later on with Chief O'Brien, or Cole Meany as Chief O'Brien, who also does pretty good in this episode as well. The Chief O'Brien and Picard scene with Stewart and Meany may be the best scene in the whole episode, just to be honest. It's great. Which is sad, because it doesn't include any new characters from DS9. But that's my thoughts on the Picard scenes. Let's see what else I have to talk about. I talked about kind of briefly how this is a very dark kind of episode. Like, this sets up the series as being pretty gritty and grim. The station itself is it's a wreck. The Cardassians wreck the station. It's in disarray, and the station itself is also very dark. Whereas the Enterprise is like very bright and white. The station here is very dark in both like lighting and in color. So that's pretty interesting as well, because it's Cardassian designed, right? And then also like the people on the station are not the same as people on the Enterprise. This is not a Federation or a Starfleet station. This is just an outpost in the middle of nowhere. So there's gamblers, there's Quark, like a very cartoonishly slimy kind of character that runs the bar. There's hollow suites where people go to have sex. Obviously, that's kind of the point. Like, I think Quark literally says this later on in the series. Like, that's what the hollow suite is for. There is lots of drinking, lots of gambling of both legal and illegal kinds. There's lots of crime. The Bajoran officers are kind of belligerent towards Sisko, and the Starfleet officers, Odo is very reserved and gruff. Just generally a very dark place. It feels more like a slummy Star Wars town than a Star Trek set. Really, it feels more like that. It feels like what's the name of that place? Yeah, that place from Star Wars. And I appreciate that. A big contrast between TNG and TOS. TNG and Picard as the lead felt very different from TOS. And I think that DS9 feels different from TNG in another way as well. Where we've gone on the frontier, the Wild West, out in the middle of nowhere, not very welcome. We need to rebuild. And this rebuilding is kind of a sense of like, it's like starting a new Animal Crossing save, for example. I think it's like that, where it's like, you're just exciting. Like, you pull up on a new island, and there's like a few villagers there, and not much else, and it's like, all right, let's get to work. Let's put down the flag, let's start building a new life here. We kind of see Sisko embrace that role of trying to be the new builder of this station, where things are in disarray, everybody hates each other, and it's our job to make this place into a community, a family. We see a very good scene with Quark, Sisko, Odo, and Kira, in which they convince, they kind of like bribe or extort Quark into staying on the station. He was going to leave because the station was a wreck and he wanted to get more business, and it wouldn't happen on the station because he wants money, obviously. But he wanted to leave, and then the main characters so far, we hadn't seen Dax or Bashir yet. So currently we have Sisko, Odo, and Kira are like, you're going to stay and be the community leader. We need you to stay here so that people will want to stay and have a community and we can rebuild. And they kind of extort him in a way that Captain Picard or the other characters in TNG would never do. But they really, I forgot what they do here, but they do it in a bit of a questionable way, but they convince him to stay. Which is a great scene because it shows that things don't operate the same way here as they do in TNG. Things that wouldn't fly on the Enterprise fly here because it's not a Federation station. One second, I need water. Alright, so. Yeah, so the station, gambling, scantily-clad women, holosuites, which are far more explicitly used for explicit things than in previous series. So yeah, this is a very very dark place relative to previous Star Trek sets and locations. And yeah, even the main characters don't all get along. Like in TNG, the main cast kind of already knows each other and already kind of gets along. Like, we start off on the station, on the ship, with the cast already all there, the crew's already all there, they all already have connections and know how to work together. Here, we have Odo and Kira and Quark are familiar. There's this game of cat and mouse that goes on between Quark and Odo, one of the best pairings in the show, in my opinion. It comes up almost every episode, just great Quark and Odo scenes. The writers obviously knew that this was a strong dynamic. And then we have Odo and Kira. If you know what happens later on in the show, obviously a very good character pairing as well. These characters are familiar. Some, like Quark and Odo, just don't like each other at all. And then we have the new Starfleet officers, like Sisko, who are automatically at odds with the Bajoran people who are there because they don't want them to be there, right? So it's just not a very welcoming, inviting place like it is in TNG. And I think this makes it pretty enjoyable to watch. I think that these dynamics, this tension, this sense of building, makes it pretty enjoyable. Now, once again, there are some problems with the episode itself that make it less quality than it is enjoyable or entertaining. One of these things that I find to be a little bit lacking is a plot. So lots of good setup here. This episode sets up basically everything there is to set up. Like, it sets up things that are overarching from Season 1 to Season 7, all the way through. Obviously, it sets up characters, but also sets up, like, plot elements as well. Oh, spilled water all over my face. That's embarrassing. Anyway, so it sets up the prophets. It sets up the tiers of the prophets. It sets up Ha. It sets up Gul Dukat. Mark Alimo does great as Gul Dukat. I freaking love the guy. Great Star Trek villain. It sets up a lot of things that will persist and stay unresolved until the very end of the show. These kind of more like supernatural, religious kind of elements, like the prophets and stuff, are things that kind of are part of the overarching plot until the very end. And this exposition, while important, does detract from there being an actual plot. Like in TNG, in Encounter at Farpoint, we see there be an overarching plot for that individual episode featuring Q. And obviously, this Q setup does persist until the very end with all good things, but that feels a bit more shoehorned to me, which is not the point of the episode here, so I won't talk about it a whole lot. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there is an internal, like, single plot line for that episode. Here, there's really not. Here, it's entirely just exposition, and it packs up and goes home, which is not great as far as watching it, because especially until the last few minutes when you have this kind of canned Cardassian conflict on the station that Kira resolves pretty fast, and the Sisko realization in the wormhole, there's not a whole lot to really latch onto plot-wise. Just character setups, plot lines like with the Prophet and stuff, as I mentioned, that's about it, right? So that loses a lot of points for me. You'll find here that if an episode either lacks a plot, or if it lacks messaging or theming or some kind of arc in that plot, so like a plot just to have a plot and nothing else, it will not get much higher than a 5 out of 10 for me. So I'll go ahead and say that this episode will not even get a 5 out of 10, just so you know. What else do I have to say? I think that's about all I had. I can also mention this. The character setups are pretty good. We get the whole cast here for the most part, and most of the characters are characterized pretty fast and pretty well. Nana Visitor as Kira, she's pretty good. She kind of like Avery Brooks, where she kind of struggles to hit the right notes here, especially early on. But she doesn't do a whole lot here in this episode, to be honest. But she's obviously very rebellious, very stubborn, very strong person. Odo is also great. Odo is one of my favorite characters in all of Star Trek. Very gruff, but also cheeky. Very aloof, but very competent as well as the security officer on the station. We'll find out more about this later on, but he has a sense of justice that does not follow from the law. He's very kind of like a sheriff out in the Wild West that doesn't follow the law. He just follows his own sense of justice, which is pretty sweet. Once again, very different from normal Star Trek goings-on. So we also see Jadzia Dax, who is an old friend of Sisko. This is the first person who's kind of like nice to Sisko from the start of the episode. She comes in and they know each other because Curzon Dax, her previous host, she's a Trill to clarify, her previous host was one of Sisko's mentors. So they're already pretty close. She's a friendly face. The characterization here is a bit weird because Terry Farrell acts pretty well. She sells the role pretty well, but maybe a bit sensual compared to how she is later on in the series. I don't know like what she was going for here. It's a bit uncomfortable, actually, because it's not the way she ends up being later on. Perhaps I'm misreading it pretty badly, but that's the way that I saw it. She's more grounded and direct later on, for sure. We see Julian Bashir, the doctor, young, fresh-faced doctor, like mid-20s, I think, right? So he's a very different kind of doctor. He's a horn dog, for starters, so there you go. His entire characterization right here is just being into Dax. Like, his first line is asking her out to a date. And it's pretty cheesy, but Alexander Siddig does a pretty good job here. The character of Bashir won't get a whole lot just of anything for a while, so don't waste a whole lot of thought on that for now. But when he does have a pretty good episode, I'll be sure to talk about who he actually is as a character, because we don't see a whole lot of that here. We just know that he's smart, boyish, immature, and horny. There you go. That's about it. So I think one of the best performances here is Cole Meany as O'Brien. So O'Brien is from TNG, but he is being dropped off on the station. He's getting a kind of a promotion to the engineering officer on the station, which is a great addition to the cast. It ties TNG and DS9 together, and he's also just great. He's great at the role. He's a great character to have, a very grounded character. He feels like the more relatable blue-collar kind of dad who's just trying to get his family, through it. He's working for his wife and his kids. He doesn't really understand like all the nonsense that goes on in the station. He's just doing his job, right? He feels very just human, like normal guy, like one of like if normal person was in the Star Trek world, not these like super intelligent futuristic people, right? Quark is great. Armin Shimmerman is awesome as Quark. The nose prosthetic here that he's wearing is a bit different because the prosthetic was made for Rom, not for Quark. So they'll fix that the next episode. But he's good here. He's very sleazy, very scummy, very just conniving, very just funny character. He's a great contrast to the kind of like very justice led. I wouldn't say goody two shoes, but kind of like that, where like they have a strong sense of justice and morals. Strong contrast to that, because he's quite the opposite of moral, to be honest. And then obviously we have Sisko. Now I didn't necessarily praise Avery Brooks' performance as Sisko here, but I will say that the character of Sisko is very different in a good way. Sisko is my favorite commander/captain in all of Trek, and I like it because he's badass. He will punch his way through situations. He doesn't always use the same level of diplomacy as Starfleet would insist on. He does things his own way, and he gets it done, which I really appreciate. Now, once again, Brooks' unusual lack of emotional range makes it pretty tough here. It's kind of no wonder that the series didn't gain a lot of traction at first, because or even as much as TNG ever did, because this first episode, the lead here, our lens as the audience is just a bit off, to be honest. That detracts quite a bit from the series, or from this episode for me, because like it's hard to really get locked in because Avery Brooks kind of struggles here. Now, I promise you, I like Avery Brooks as an actor. I know I keep harping on it. I think he's great, and he does great later on. But right here, kind of detracts a lot because he's the focus. Now later on, when he's less of a focus, or when he's better at acting as Sisko, he does great. So there you go. And all in all, in conclusion, after saying all that, this episode it's a pretty good pilot. Well, I should say it does its job as a pilot. I think it is one of the best pilots of Star Trek. It does its job with setup and characters and stuff, and it kind of just packs up and leaves. It doesn't really have a whole lot of plot to be spoken of. It could have used a real like overarching story pretty badly, and it had the potential to gain a few points if Sisko's character was handled a bit better in both the writing and the acting. In the first half especially, like I said, the acting in the second half is pretty alright. The writing is pretty alright, but the first half really struggles. The first half is more entertaining, but it's not as well written. And the second half is better written, but less entertaining because the prophet scenes and the wormholes just drag on forever. So there's that. But the second half is just slightly better because of the plot direction, and like it gives Sisko some more time to like shine and be, to actually work through his character arc, right, and show some actual emotional range that hits this time. So half 2 is pretty good. But yeah, despite this, the prophet scenes, they drag on. The Cardassian battle scene, which I didn't really even talk about a whole lot because it's kind of boring. It happens towards the end. The Cardassians attack the station. It's whatever. Pretty corny, pretty unentertaining in my opinion. So yeah, all this exposition, it makes me excited. Like I'm excited for what's to come. And hopefully future reviews will be, a bit shorter than this one, because this is a pretty long one. Maybe like half the length or so, but we'll see what I end up doing. And yeah, this got pretty long, pretty fast, because I had a lot to discuss up front. But this episode is, as far as where it ranks on the ranking, it's number 1 because it's the first episode that I've done so far. So it's number 1. I lean more towards it being the worst so far than the best so far, honestly. It's going to get a 5 out of 10 for entertainment value and a 4 out of 10 for quality, for the reasons that I mentioned. 4 out of 10 is watchable. A 4 out of 10 is where I cut off from unwatchable to watchable, but watchable is about all it can do for me, to be honest. So yeah, that is going to do it for my summary and my review of Emissary, the pilot of DS9. Hopefully you enjoyed and got some insight into what I believe are the important aspects of quality in an episode here, like the writing and the acting, those kind of things, and how it related to this episode. So, yeah, with that in mind, love you guys. Be safe, be smart, don't be stupid, and have a great rest of your day.